Marta's gnarled fingers, still caked beneath the nails with the sacred filth of her work, trembled as they pressed against Lady Seraphina's cooling brow. The air in the birthing chamber was a nauseating cocktail of blood, rosewater, and the sharp, coppery tang of something far more primal. A single candle flamed through monstrous, dancing shadows on the stone walls, each one a grotesque mimicry of the event that had just transpired. 3 hours. It had been only 3 hours since the world had fractured. Seraphina lay like a shattered porcelain doll against the sweat-soaked linens, her emerald eyes wide with a terror that death had been unable to erase. Her mouth was frozen in a silent scream. The life, the vibrant beauty that had defined her, had been utterly drained, leaving behind a vessel that was pale and empty. Marta had seen death in all its forms, but this was not a surrender to nature. This was an extraction, and the source of that extraction was gone, stolen from the bloody sheets by a squad of terrified guards under the grim command of Lord Raymond. The door to the chamber crashed open, splintering the morbid silence. Lord Raymond Blackthorn stood silhouetted against the torchlight of the corridor. He seemed to have aged a decade in the span of an evening. His tall frame was hunched, his black hair streaked with a new, premature silver. But it was his eyes that held Marta, yellow-tinged, pupils slitted like a cat's in the dim light. The Annunaki stain, she thought with a cold, clinical detachment. She no longer had the energy to fear. It's waking up in him, too. "You," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper of hatred. "You venomous crone. What have you done to my house?" Marta had no words left. Explanations were useless against the face of such grief and fury. She had tried, in the frantic, bloody moments after the birth, to make him see. "It is not a curse, my lord. Look at its strength. See its eyes. It is your blood, your ancient blood, expressing itself." He had heard only the ravings of a witch. 2 guards, their faces set in masks of grim duty, seized her by her bony arms. They did not look at her, nor at the dead lady in the bed. They dragged her from the room, her bare feet scraping against the cold stone flags. The last thing Marta saw was the vast, dark stain on the rug where the heir of House Blackthorn had drawn its first guttural breath. The descent into the dungeons was a journey into another world, one of damp, stagnant air and the pervasive smell of rot and despair. The torches here smoked and sputtered, their light barely penetrating the oppressive gloom. They threw her into a cell that was little more than a wet hole in the rock. The door, the lattice of rusted iron bars, slammed shut with a finality that echoed in her soul. The cold seeped through her thin hemp robes immediately, a deep, bone-aching chill. In the corner, a pile of moldy straw promised neither comfort nor warmth. This was where she would die. She knew it with a certainty that was as solid as the stone around her. Time became a blur. She dozed fitfully, haunted by the image of the child. Not a child, a creature, that had emerged not with a mewling cry, but with a snarl. It had been the size of a 5-year-old, its body covered in a fine, dark down, its mouth already sporting tiny, needle-sharp wolf fangs. Its eyes, open and aware from the first second, had shifted from the gold of its father to a deep, bloody crimson as it fed on the very life force of its mother. The clanking of the cell door bolt startled her awake. A massive figure filled the doorway, blocking the feeble light. Sir Aldrich the Grim, his bald, branded head, his scarred face missing an ear, and his one good gray eye fixed on her were a vision of nightmares. The thick leather apron he wore was stained with old and new blood. "The Lord wishes to know." Aldrich's voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together. "Which demon did you bargain with? Speak its name, and your suffering will be brief." He didn't wait for an answer. He never did. He backhanded her across the face. The world exploded in a constellation of white-hot pain. The coppery taste of blood filled her mouth. This was only the beginning. He was a craftsman of agony. He used not the grand instruments of torture, but simple, brutal efficiency. His fists, like iron vices, found the tender spots between her ribs. He twisted her arms until she was certain the bones would snap. Through the haze of pain, Marta clung to the truth. It was her anchor in the storm. "No, demon," she choked out, spitting a glob of blood onto the filth-covered floor. "The blood. Blackthorn blood." Aldrich grunted, unimpressed. He seized her left hand, splaying her work-worn fingers on the cold stone floor. "The Lord thinks you use these hands to weave your curse. Perhaps we should see how well you work without them." He brought the heel of his heavy boot down on her fingers. A sharp, sickening crunch. Agony, blinding and absolute, shot up her arm. She screamed then, a raw, torn sound that was swallowed by the dungeon's oppressive silence. He did it again, and again. When he released her, 3 of her fingers on her left hand were bent at impossible angles, pulped and useless. She cradled the mangled hand to her chest, sobbing, the physical pain finally breaking through her resolve. It was in this state of shattered agony that a new sound pierced the dungeon's quiet. It started as a low, guttural rumble, echoing from the depths of the passageways. It was the sound of shouting men, the clang of steel, and then terrified screams that were abruptly cut short. Aldrich straightened up, his one good eye narrowing. He drew the heavy broadsword from his back. What in the 7 hells? The sounds grew closer. A guard, his face a mask of sheer terror, stumbled into the light outside Marta's cell. "Aldrich, it's loose. The thing, it killed Roderick and the others. It's coming this way." Before Aldrich could respond, a shadow fell over the cell. It stood at the end of the corridor, no longer a swaddled newborn. In 3 hours, it had grown to the size of a large wolfhound. Its limbs were longer, more defined, corded with unnerving muscle. The fine hair on its arms was thicker now, coarse black pelt. Its mouth, slightly agape, revealed the lengthening wolf fangs, still slick with something dark. Its eyes glowed like embers in the torchlight. It moved with a predator's grace, ignoring the armed and armored Aldrich as if he were furniture. Its crimson gaze was fixed solely on Marta, cowering in her cell. The creature took a step forward, a low, rumbling sound vibrating in its chest. It wasn't a growl of threat. It was a sound of distress, of need. And then it spoke. The voice was a wet, guttural rasp, tearing from a throat not meant for human speech. But the word was unmistakable. Mama. It wasn't calling for its dead mother. It was looking straight at Marta. It had returned for the woman who brought it into this world. The creature's guttural cry hung in the stagnant air, a word both horrifying and pathetic. Mama. It took another step, its clawed feet scraping on the stone. Sir Aldrich, for all his brutal prowess, stood frozen, his sword held in a white-knuckled grip. He was a man who broke human bodies, not this. Marta, huddled against the wall with her shattered hand cradled to her chest, felt a fresh wave of terror, cold and sharp. It was not the fear of being killed, but the fear of being claimed. This thing, this heir, saw her as its anchor. Aldrich found his voice a low, threatening growl. "Back, beast. Back to the pits you crawled from." The creature's crimson eyes flickered from Marta to the torturer. A low snarl rumbled in its chest, a sound far more bestial than its attempted speech. It bared its fangs, a clear and present warning. "Don't," Marta croaked, her throat raw from screaming. "Don't provoke it." It was too late. Aldrich, emboldened by a lifetime of instilling fear, took a threatening step forward, raising his sword. "I'll send you back to whatever demon your mother whelped you for." The creature moved with a blur of shocking speed. It didn't lunge for the blade. It ducked under the swing and slammed its full weight into Aldrich's midsection. The air left the massive man's lungs with a pained grunt. He stumbled back, his armor screeching against the wall. The creature was on him in an instant, not with fangs, but with a powerful, clawed hand that clamped around his sword wrist. There was a sickening crack. Aldrich roared in pain and surprise, his broadsword clattering to the floor. The creature stood over him, its chest heaving, its hot, rank breath fogging in the cold air. It stared down at the helpless torturer, its head cocked as if studying a curious insect. It could have tore his throat out. It had the means and the provocation. Instead, it released him, giving him a shove that sent him sprawling into the opposite wall. The message was clear. "You are beneath my notice." She is mine. Then, it turned back to the cell bars. It wrapped its powerful, oddly proportioned hands around the cold iron and shook them. The metal, thick and rusted, groaned in protest. Dust and chunks of ancient mortar rained down. Marta squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable, for the bars to be ripped from their moorings. But they held. A sound of pure frustration, a mix of a whine and a roar, erupted from the creature. It slammed its body against the door once, twice, the entire cell trembling with the impact. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, it stilled. It pressed its face between two bars, its glowing eyes fixed on Marta. It made that sound again, softer now. Masama. Then it turned and melted back into the shadows of the corridor, leaving only the sound of Aldrich's pained breathing and the echo of its presence. Minutes, or perhaps hours, later, new footsteps approached, cautious and light. A different guard, one with a pronounced limp and a face etched with a permanent look of unease. Roderick the jailer peered into the cell. He flinched at the sight of Aldrich clutching his broken wrist. Then his eyes found Marta. "By the gods," he whispered. He fumbled with the keys at his belt, his hands shaking. He didn't enter, but he slid a wooden bowl of water and a crust of hard bread through the slot at the bottom of the door. The creature, it's gone back to the upper dungeons. For now, his eyes darted toward Aldrich. "Do you need help, sir?" Aldrich just glared, cradling his injured arm as he got to his feet. He shot a look of pure venom at Marta, as if the creature's actions were a doing, and staggered away without a word. Roderick lingered for a moment longer. I'll try to find some rags for your hand," he murmured, before hastily retreating. The encounter changed the dungeon's dynamics. Aldrich did not return the next day. Instead, a new visitor arrived, draped in the black robes of the divine. Father Cornelius, castle priest, was a skeletal man whose jaundiced skin seemed to cling directly to his skull. His watery blue eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, regarded Marta as a fascinating, repulsive specimen. "The stench of sulfur still clings to this place," he announced, holding a small, leather-bound tome to his chest. "But fear not, child. The light of the divine can scour even the most stained of souls." He began to pray, his voice a dry, reedy monotone. He sprinkled holy water through the bars, the droplets hissing faintly as they hit the damp stone near Marta. He held up a silver sigil, chanting rites of exorcism. Marta endured it, her head bowed, not in prayer, but in exhaustion. His words were like pebbles thrown at a mountain. He was fighting a phantom enemy, a demon that did not exist. When his incantations produced no screaming, no convulsing, no profane revelations, his thin lips pursed in disappointment. "The demon within you is cunning. It hides deep." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Confess, woman. Name the entity you serve, and we can begin the true purification." "I serve life," Marta whispered, her voice hoarse. "And sometimes life takes strange forms." "Blasphemy," he hissed, but a flicker of uncertainty was in his eyes. He had expected a clearer enemy. After he left, a deeper silence fell. It was broken by the arrival of Dr. Wilhelm Graves. The royal physician was a gaunt, severe man with white hair tied tightly back. He carried a leather bag, not the tools of torture, but of medicine. He was accompanied by 2 guards who watched him warily. "Lord Raymond wishes you kept alive. For now," Dr. Graves stated, his voice crisp. He gestured for the guards to unlock the cell. They hesitated. "The creature is dormant. It will not return until nightfall. Now open it." Once inside, he knelt beside Marta, ignoring the filth. His movements were efficient, detached. He examined her bruised face, her broken fingers. "Aldrich is a blunt instrument," he muttered, almost to himself, as he set her fingers as best he could and wrapped them in a crude splint. His movements were surprisingly gentle. He leaned in close, pretending to listen to her breathing. "The child grows at an exponential rate," he whispered, his voice so low only she could hear. "It has shed its skin twice. Its vocalizations are becoming more complex." He opened his medical bag, showing her not vials of medicine, but a journal. For a fleeting second, she saw a detailed, anatomical sketch of a human hand, but the bones were all wrong, elongated, the joints reversed. It was a sketch of Lord Raymond's gloved hand. "The blood is the key, Marta," Dr. Graves whispered, his eyes intense behind his spectacles. "Not a curse, a lineage. I have seen it in the father, in the uncle in the tower, and now in the son." He closed his bag with a snap, his voice returning to its normal, clinical tone. "The fever has broken. She will live. See that she is fed." He left her then, with her throbbing hand and her mind reeling. Father Cornelius saw demons. Lord Raymond saw a curse, but Dr. Graves saw a bloodline. He saw the truth, and his secret confirmation was a flame of hope in the crushing darkness. The horror was real, but it had a name, and it was not witchcraft. It was evolution, and it was unfolding, hour by bloody hour, in the stones of House Blackthorn. The thin, greasy broth Roderick brought that evening tasted of ashes, but Marta forced it down. Survival was no longer an instinct, it was a duty. Dr. Graves' whispered confirmation had forged her shattered resolve into a cold, hard blade. She was not a cursed crone. She was the sole chronicler of a terrible, unfolding truth. The darkness of the cell became her canvas, and memory her paints. As the dungeon's eternal night deepened, the ghosts of Blackthorn's past stirred from their graves in her mind. She remembered Lord Marcus, Raymond's father, a regal bear of a man, his laughter once echoing through the great hall. But in his final years, a stoop had conquered his proud posture, forcing him to hunch as if under an invisible weight. His eyes, in certain lights, had shifted from stern gray to a faint, unsettling yellow. She had delivered him a sleeping draught the night he died. The servants said he died screaming about the ancestors calling from the deep earth. But Marta, who had helped shroud the body, knew the rest of the story. The corpse had to be chained inside its coffin, the lid nailed shut with iron spikes, because something inside had continued to twitch and snarl for hours after his heart had stopped. Then there was Lady Rowena, Raymond's mother, a great beauty, famed for her golden hair and gentle spirit. But with each child she bore, a piece of that beauty was carved away. After Raymond's difficult birth, her hair had turned shockingly white overnight. She'd been plagued by prophetic nightmares, whispering of stone cities under the sand and the sleepers in the blood. She had drowned herself in the castle well, not out of despair, but out of a frantic, final fear. Her last words to a young Marta: "They are waking up below. I can hear them scratching." But the most vivid ghost, the one that haunted her with the sharpness of a fresh wound, was young Lord Cedric. Cedric, Raymond's first son, her first delivery for the current generation. A handsome, robust boy with his mother's smile. For 12 years, he was the picture of health. Then, puberty struck like a lightning bolt. Marta was summoned to the family's private chambers. Cedric was in a fevered state, his body hot to the touch. In a single month, he had shot up 8 inches, his limbs stretching with an audible, sickening popping of tendons. His voice cracked not into a man's tenor, but into a guttural baritone. One morning, he woke screaming. All his teeth had fallen out. Within days, they were replaced by a full set of sharp, predatory fangs. Raymond had refused to see it. A strange ague, he'd insisted. A boy's growing pains. Marta had tried to warn him. "My lord, this is not an illness. It is a transition. We must understand it, not fight it." She was dismissed as a superstitious old woman. The tragedy happened during a full moon. Cedric, his mind likely addled by the rapid changes, had attacked a stable boy. It wasn't a fight, it was a predation. When guards pulled him off, the boy was nearly dead, his throat torn. Cedric, his mouth smeared with blood, looked more confused and vicious, like a sleepwalker startled awake. It was Lord Raymond himself who had passed the sentence. "My son is possessed," he declared, his face a mask of heartbreak and denial. "A demon has taken root in him." The execution was a quiet, terrible affair in the courtyard. Raymond, with tears streaming down his face, drove a silver-tipped sword through his own son's heart. The belief was that silver killed demons. As Cedric lay dying on the cobblestones, his yellow eyes found Marta's. There was no demon in them, only a child's profound confusion and betrayal. Marta had known, with a certainty that chilled her soul, that the silver had done nothing special. It was the cold iron of the blade that had killed him, just as it would kill any man. He wasn't demon-possessed. He was simply becoming what his blood demanded. Raymond hadn't slain a monster. He had murdered his own son out of fear. The memory was a fresh brand on her soul when the heavy tread of boots announced a new visitor. Lord Raymond stood outside her cell. The torchlight carved deep hollows in his cheeks, and the yellow tint in his eyes was more pronounced, a sickly, sulphurous glow. He had discarded his gloves. His fingernails, she saw, were thick, curved, and dark, like chips of obsidian. "The creature killed 2 more guards last night," he said, his voice flat, drained of all emotion. "It speaks now. A single word. Mama." He spat the word as if it were poison. "It calls for you, witch." "Why?" Marta looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw not a powerful lord, but a terrified man drowning in a legacy he could not comprehend. The grief for Cedric, the horror at Seraphina's death, the fear of his own changing body. It had all curdled into this single, focused hatred for her. "It does not call me mother, my lord," Marta said, her voice quiet but clear in the stagnant air. "It calls me Marta. I am the first thing it knew in this world. I am the only constant. It is not a demon seeking its summoner. It is a lost child, an heir, seeking its midwife." Raymond's hand shot through the bars, faster than she would have thought possible, and seized her by the throat. His grip was iron-strong, the claw-like nails digging into her flesh. "Do not speak of that thing as my heir," he snarled, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled oddly metallic. "Cedric was my heir, and you let a demon take him too. You stood by and did nothing." She choked, clawing at his wrist with her one good hand. He was killing her, but in his eyes she saw it, the same confused terror that had been in Cedric's eyes. He wasn't just blaming her. He was begging her, in his own twisted way, for an answer that did not damn his entire bloodline. Just as spots began to dance before her eyes, he released her. She collapsed to the floor, gasping. "The questioning will continue," Raymond said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage and something else, desperation. "You will confess the truth, the real truth." As his footsteps faded, Marta lay on the cold stone, rubbing her bruised neck. He was as much a prisoner as she was, chained by the very blood in his veins. He was fighting the future, just as he had fought Cedric's. And Marta knew, with a chilling certainty, that this time, the future was stronger, faster, and waiting in the dark just beyond the torchlight. It would not be so easily killed. The imprint of Lord Raymond's fingers remained on Marta's throat, a necklace of purple and blue. The physical pain was a dull throb compared to the chilling realization it had brought. The lord of the house was not just a jailer, but a fellow victim, his judgment clouded by a terror that mirrored her own. She had to survive, not just for herself, but to be a witness to the truth he so desperately denied. The dungeon, once a tomb of isolation, began to reveal faint signs of life, of sympathy. Roderick the jailer was the most consistent. His limp was more pronounced the next time he brought her water, his pockmarked face pale. "Took a fall," he muttered, avoiding her eyes as he slid a water skin and a slightly less stale piece of cheese through the slot. But his hands trembled, and Marta saw the truth. It wasn't a fall. It was the aftermath of the creature's rampage. "He is afraid of you," Marta said softly. Not a question, but a statement. Roderick flinched. He glanced furtively down the dark corridor before leaning closer, his voice a barely audible whisper. "It don't come down this far when I'm on duty. Not since it spoke to you. It paces the upper corridors, like it's waiting." He swallowed hard. "Captain Stormborn. He says to keep you alive. Says you might be the only one who knows how to calm it." So, the grizzled guard captain harbored doubts. This was a thread of hope. The next thread came from an even unlikelier source. Late that night, long after the torches had burned low, a different, lighter set of footsteps approached. A figure cloaked in shadow paused outside her cell. A delicate, long-fingered hand slipped through the bars, dropping a small, linen-wrapped bundle onto the straw near Marta. "Come free and yarrow," a woman's voice whispered, cool and clear as a mountain stream. It was Elena, Raymond's sister. Marta fumbled for the bundle with her good hand. The herbs were fresh, they're pungent. Green sent a shocking assault on the dungeon's rot. They were for her broken fingers, for reducing inflammation. "Your brother will have your head if he finds out," Marta whispered back, her heart pounding. Elena's unnaturally golden eyes gleamed in the darkness. "My brother is a fool, trying to bleed a truth from you that he already knows in his own bones." She stood tall, her silhouette against the bars imposing, her height a quiet testament to the giant ancestry expressing itself. "He fears what he is becoming. He fears the child because it is what he will be. I do not have that luxury. Why help me?" "Because you are the only one who does not call it a demon," Elena replied. "You see it for what it is. Our blood, our future. And because my nephew, for all his ferocity, seeks you out, you have a connection to him. That makes you valuable. That makes you worth keeping alive." She paused. "My other nephew, Cedric, you tried to save him too. I remember." Before Marta could respond, Elena melted back into the shadows, leaving only the scent of herbs and a profound sense of shifting alliances. But not all ghosts from the past were benevolent. The following day, a new visitor came, trailing the scent of incense and guilt. Sister Margaret, her face plump and lined with anxiety, her hands constantly ringing a rosary whose beads were dark with the blood from her perpetually picked cuticles. "Marta," she began, her voice trembling. She stood well back from the bars, as if fearing contamination. "I have prayed for your soul. I have told them. I had to tell them everything. About the strange births, the notes you kept. It was my duty to the church to guide." Marta looked at her former apprentice, the girl she had taught to tie an umbilical cord and brew motherwort tea. Now, she saw a woman shattered by fear, seeking absolution for her betrayal. "You told them what you saw, child," Marta said, her voice weary. "You saw the truth, and it frightened you. You gave it a name you could understand, demon. It is easier to burn a witch than to face a monstrous new world." Sister Margaret's face crumpled, but the fangs, the eyes. Lady Seraphina, drained of life. What else could it be? "It is life, Margaret," Marta insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of its old authority. "A terrible, brutal new form of life. And your prayers and your confessions will not stop it. It is in the blood. It is in the Lord who rules this castle. It is in his sister who stands a head taller than any man. Look around you. The evidence is everywhere but in your prayer book." Tears streamed down Margaret's cheeks. She fled then, her sobs echoing in the corridor, her faith a poor shield against the terrifying reality. The final, and most crucial, alliance was forged in the deep of night. Marta was awakened by a faint scraping at the base of the back wall of her cell. It was not stone, but a section of damp, rotten wood, cleverly disguised. It swung inward, and a stout, flour-dusted woman, with a warm, wrinkled face and arms strong from a lifetime of kneading dough squeezed through. "Greta the cook. About time I checked on my best customer," Greta whispered, her voice a familiar, comforting rumble. She handed Marta a small, still warm meat pasty. "Eat. You'll need your strength." Marta devoured it, the flavor of real food a shocking delight. "Greta, you risk too much." "Pa, I've been sneaking through these passages since before you delivered your first Blackthorn babe," the old cook scoffed. "I know every secret this old pile of stones has to offer. I knew Lady Rowena. I heard her nightmares. I saw what became of Lord Marcus, and I fed young Cedric his last meal." Her eyes grew somber. "This is no curse, Marta. This is the family recipe, and it's finally cooked through." "Does anyone else know?" "The captain. Elena. Captain Stormborn suspects, but he follows orders. The Lady Elena. She knows more than she lets on. But the one you need to watch is the physician. Graves. He digs in the dark places. He knows things. Greta leaned in closer. The child, Marta, it doesn't eat normal food. The guards, they try to feed it scraps, but it only drinks blood. Animal blood for now. But it's getting stronger. And it's getting smarter. Marta felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The pieces were falling into place. The Annunaki legacy wasn't just about physical transformation. It was about a fundamental shift in nature. A predator was awakening in the heart of Blackthorn Keep. She was no longer alone in her cell. She was at the center of a silent, secret network, a fearful jailer, a pragmatic sister, a guilt-ridden apprentice, and a savvy old cook. They were the unlikeliest of allies, bound by a shared, horrifying secret. And outside the stone walls, a growing heir, a predator of pure Blackthorn blood, was crying her name in the dark, binding her to a future she could no longer escape. The creature no longer cried. It commanded. Its guttural calls for Masama had evolved over days into a new single, intelligible word that echoed through the stone labyrinth like a dread drumbeat. Out. The sound was no longer that of a distressed infant, but the resonant, furious demand of a caged apex predator. It was a voice that should not have existed, torn from a throat that was reshaping itself by the hour. With that one word, the last vestiges of its perceived helplessness evaporated. The atmosphere in the dungeons shifted from one of grim duty to outright terror. The guards who patrolled the upper levels did so in pairs, their faces pale, their knuckles white on their spear shafts. The stories they whispered to Roderick, who then relayed them to Marta in hushed, terrified tones, painted a picture of rapid, terrifying evolution. "It's as tall as a man now," Roderick breathed one evening, "his one good eye wide. Its shoulders are broad, like a bull. And the hair, it's a full pelt, Marta, black and coarse." Captain Stormborn himself faced it down at the east stairwell. It just looked at him, and the captain, he stood aside. He said it wasn't fear. He said it was recognition. Marta's heart hammered against her ribs. Recognition. The creature was beginning to understand hierarchy, to assess threats. It was learning. That night, the learning turned to action. The sounds began just after the changing of the guard. Not the sporadic clashes of before, but a sustained, orchestrated chaos. Roars of fury mixed with the shrieks of tortured metal and the desperate shouts of men. It was moving with purpose, no longer a panicked animal lashing out, but a force executing a plan. Roderick stumbled into the corridor outside Marta's cell, his face a mask of blood and terror. It's clearing a path. It's tearing down the barred gates. It's coming down. Panic seized the dungeon. Guards abandoned their posts, their flight echoing through the passages. Marta pressed herself against the cold back wall of her cell. The comfrey and yarrow poultice Greta had supplied suddenly feeling like a pathetic defense against the storm that was coming. Then silence. A heavy, profound silence that was more frightening than the noise. It was the silence of the void, of a decision made. He emerged from the darkness not as a blur, but with a deliberate, powerful stride. He, for it was impossible to think of it as it any longer, stood before her cell. He had to stoop to fit in the corridor, his head nearly brushing the low ceiling. He was a giant, 7 feet of corded muscle and primal fury, clad in the tattered remains of a royal blanket. His face was a haunting fusion of human and lupin features, the jaw strong, the nose flattened, the eyes burning with a feral, ancient intelligence. The wolf fangs were prominent, glistening in the gloom. This was no lost child. This was the heir of House Blackthorn, fully manifested. He gripped the iron bars of her door. This time, there was no frustrated shaking. He planted his feet, took a deep, rumbling breath, and with a terrifying, deliberate strain of muscle and will he pulled. The metal shrieked in protest, a sound that pierced the soul. The ancient stone moorings, weakened by his previous attempts, gave way. With a final, deafening crack, the entire door was wrenched from its frame and flung aside, clattering against the far wall in a shower of stone dust and rust. The heir stood in the doorway, filling it completely, his chest heaving. The scent of him washed over Marta, wild musk, iron, and raw power. His crimson eyes locked onto her, cowering in the straw. He took a step into the cell. Marta squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end, for the fangs to find her throat as they had found the wet nurses. A touch, rough but not violent, made her flinch. She opened her eyes. He was crouched before her, his massive, clawed hand gently patting her head, much like one would comfort a frightened puppy. The gesture was so bizarre, so utterly out of place, that it stole her breath. "Marta," he rumbled, his voice a landslide of sound. "Safe." It was not a question. It was a declaration, a decree. He had not come to kill her. He had come to claim her, to liberate her. In his distorted, primal understanding, she was his, the one constant in a world of pain and confusion, the one who had ushered him into it. He saw the chains, the filth, the broken fingers, and he had judged it an injustice. He was rectifying it. He rose to his full height and turned to face the corridor, a low growl emanating from his chest, a warning to any who would approach. He was not just freeing her. He was appointing himself her guardian, her monstrous, terrifying protector. Marta stared at the empty doorway, at the path to freedom he had violently carved for her. But it was not freedom. It was a different kind of prison. To step out was to step into his world, to accept his protection, to bind herself irrevocably to this terrifying evolution. He had not broken her out of her cage. He had simply moved her into a larger one, with himself as the walls. The heir stood his ground, a sentinel of flesh and bone, waiting for her to accept her new, terrifying role in the dawning age of House Blackthorn. The heir did not move. He was a statue hewn from shadow and menace, blocking the ruined doorway, his presence a tangible wall. Marta could not flee, could not even think of fleeing. The raw, possessive certainty in his single word, safe, had built a new cage around her, far stronger than the iron bars now lying twisted on the floor. Exhaustion, a tide of mental and physical anguish, finally pulled her under. She slumped against the wall, her head lolling to the side, the world dissolving into a feverish haze. The cold stone beneath her ceased to be stone. It became warm, fine-grained and golden. The stench of the dungeon melted away, replaced by the dry, ancient scent of sun-baked clay and a strange, ozonic energy that crackled in the air. She was no longer in a cell. She stood in a vast, cyclopean hall. The architecture was impossibly tall, the pillars stretching up into a swirling, bronze-hued sky. The angles were wrong, subtly alien, designed for a different sense of balance. This was not a human place, and he was there. The ancient Blackthorn ancestor stood before her, and the sight of him made the air in the dungeon seem like a mere sketch. He was 9 feet tall, his form humanoid but the proportions unsettling. An elongated torso, arms that reached past his knees, and fingers that were one joint too long. His skin had a metallic, bronze sheen, and his head was elongated, like the king's in the most archaic Sumerian reliefs. But it was his eyes that held her, large, almond-shaped, and glowing with a soft, unwavering gold light. They held an intelligence so vast and so old that Marta felt like a mayfly glimpsing the turning of the seasons. "You are the witness." The voice was not sound. It was a resonance that vibrated directly in her mind, layering meaning upon meaning. It was the rumble of tectonic plates, the whisper of the solar wind. Marta tried to speak, to ask, to plead, but her voice was gone. She was only a receptacle for his transmission. You see, a curse, a monster, a perversion. A wave of images flooded her. The heir being born, Cedric transforming, Raymond's clawed hands, Elena's unnatural height. You see the broken pottery and weep, not understanding the forging of the sword. The perspective shifted. She saw the Blackthorn bloodline not as a family tree, but as a river, sluggish and dormant for millennia, now suddenly rushing forward, carving a new path. The changes were not deformities, they were awakenings. The strength, the senses, the predatory nature, they were features, not bugs. The ultimate expression of a legacy buried deep in the helix of their being. The shell must crack for the fledgling to fly. The seed must split for the tree to rise. This is not an end. It is a beginning. The image of the heir filled her mind, no longer a horror, but a magnificent, terrifying masterpiece of this new design. Powerful, adaptive, intelligent. The next step, the Annunaki progeny, finally shedding the fragile human form that had been its cocoon. The child is the key, the first pure expression in an age of dust. He is not cursed. He is evolved, and he recognizes you, witness. You who facilitated his emergence. You are the midwife to the new world, not the scapegoat for the old. The vision of the ancestor began to fade, the great hall dissolving back into the gritty reality of the dungeon. But the final resonance echoed in her soul, a truth that rewrote everything. The only true curse here is their fear. Marta gasped, jolting back to consciousness. The cold was back, the damp, the smell. The heir still stood in the doorway, a monument of patient power. But everything was different. She looked at him, truly looked, with the ancestor's vision overlaying her own. The wolfish features were not a demon's mockery, but efficient biological tools. The massive frame was not brutish, but optimized for power. The intelligence in those crimson eyes was not malevolent, but different, ancient. He was not a creature to be pitted or destroyed. He was a king in waiting, and this dungeon was his antechamber. Her fear did not vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer the fear of being eaten by a monster, but the awe-inspiring terror of standing at the foot of a volcano, witnessing the birth of a new mountain. She had been asking the wrong questions. It didn't matter if she could escape, or if the Blackthorns would accept the truth. The only question that mattered now was what role she would choose to play in the world that was coming, whether she wanted to or not. The midwife's work was not yet done. She had merely delivered the firstborn. Now, she had to learn how to live in the world he would create. She met the heir's gaze, and for the first time, she did not flinch. A profound understanding passed between them, midwife and heir, witness and evolution. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Marta," he rumbled again, the word now a bond and acknowledgement. He had not come to rescue the helpless old woman. He had come to collect his chronicler. The new understanding was a fragile crystal in Marta's mind, easily shattered by the crude realities of the dungeon. It was tested almost immediately by the arrival of Lord Vance of Greymoor. The portly noble's fine silks were rumpled, his ruddy face pale, with a mixture of terror and ghoulish excitement. He stood at a safe distance down the corridor, flanked by his own guards, peering at the ruined cell door and the colossal figure guarding it. "By the gods, Blackthorn," he breathed, though Raymond was not present. "It's true. It's grown into a full-blooded beast." His eyes, wide with morbid curiosity, then fell on Marta, and the witch yet lives. Fascinating. The heir took a single step forward, a low, continuous growl rumbling from his chest like distant thunder. It was not the explosive roar of before, but a steady, warning vibration that promised immediate and total annihilation. Lord Vance and his men stumbled back several paces, their hands flying to their sword hilts. "Come now, let us be reasonable." Vance squeaked, his bravado evaporating. It was then that Dr. Wilhelm Graves arrived, his pristine medical coat a stark contrast to the filth. He ignored the terrified noble and addressed the heir directly, his voice calm, clinical. "I mean her no harm," Graves stated, holding up his empty hands. "I need to check her wounds. Infection will rob you of your witness." The heir's growl subsided to a watchful silence. His intelligent eyes scanned the physician, assessing the truth of his words. After a long, tense moment, he shifted his weight slightly, granting a narrow passage. It was a conscious, calculated permission. The beast was not just strong, it was discerning. Graves slipped into the cell, his movements efficient. As he pretended to examine Marta's healing fingers, he spoke under his breath. "Vance is a magpie. He collects secrets to trade for power. He saw the birth. He knows it was no ordinary child. My journal, he has been asking about it." The physician's face was grim. If he gets his hands on it, he will not see it as a scientific marvel. He will brand it as proof of demonic taint and use it to rally the other houses against Blackthorn. He will call for a crusade. The threat was no longer internal. The secret was leaking, and in the hands of a man like Vance, it would become a weapon that could destroy House Blackthorn far more effectively than any internal curse. The next day, the storm broke. Father Cornelius marched into the dungeon, his skeletal frame trembling not with fear, but with triumphant fury. In his hands, he clutched Dr. Graves' leather journal. "I have it," the priest shrieked, his voice cracking with zeal. The proof, not of demons, but of something far, far worse. Heresy against the very design of God. He waved the journal at Marta and the watching heir. Anatomical sketches, notes on dominant alien alleles, and atrahasis gene expression. This is not witchcraft. It is a blasphemous science, an attempt to improve upon the Creator's work. He had found the journal, likely with Lord Vance's encouragement, and he had understood just enough to be terrified in a whole new way. A demon could be exorcised, but bloodline choosing its own evolution, that was a threat to the very foundation of his world. The heir watched the priest performance, his head cocked. He seemed less angered and more curious, like a scholar observing a rare insect. But the scene was shattered by a sudden, desperate cry. Sister Margaret rushed into the corridor, her wimple askew, her face blotchy with tears. "Stop, Father, please," she begged, throwing herself between the priest and the cell. "She is not a heretic. She told me the truth. It's in their blood. It's natural. We are persecuting them for what they are." She had finally broken. The weight of her betrayal and the terrifying, logical truth of Marta's words had crushed her fragile faith. In a final, desperate act of penance, she was confessing the real sin, their own blindness. Father Cornelius stared at her in horror. "You are bewitched as well, sister. Step aside, lest you share her fate." "No," Margaret cried, turning to face the heir, her arms spread wide as if to protect him. "Can you not see? He is not evil. He is just different." It was a brave, foolish, and ultimately tragic gesture. The sudden movement, the raised voice, the frantic energy, it was too much. A primal instinct, honed over days of being threatened and attacked, overrode the heir's burgeoning reason. He did not see a defender. He saw a threat lunging toward his protected charge. There was a blur of motion, a sound like a wet sack of grain being hit by a battering ram. Sister Margaret was flung against the far wall with unimaginable force. She slid to the floor, her neck bent at an impossible angle, her eyes wide with shock, the ghost of her failed redemption frozen on her face. Silence. The heir looked at the lifeless body, then at his own clawed hand. He let out a confused rumble, a sound of frustration and dawning regret. He had acted on impulse, and in doing so, he had slain the one person who had tried to defend him. Father Cornelius dropped the journal and fled, his screams of "Murderer!" echoing through the dungeons. Marta closed her eyes, the fragile crystal of her new understanding cracking. This was the cost. This was the brutal, unvarnished truth of the evolution she was witnessing. It was not a clean, noble ascent. It was a messy, bloody transition where the first and most tragic casualties were compassion and innocence. The path to a new world was paved with the bones of the old. The death of Sister Margaret hung in the dungeon air, a pall of finality. It silenced even Father Cornelius's retreating screams. The heir stood over the small, broken body, his massive head lowered. A low, confused whine escaped him, the sound utterly at odds with his terrifying form. He nudged her gently with a clawed finger, as if trying to wake her. The gesture was heartbreaking in its futility. Marta watched, a cold sorrow settling in her bones. This was the price of awakening. This was the collateral damage. Margaret's death was not an act of evil, but a tragedy of misunderstanding. A new, powerful instinct colliding with an old, fragile world. When Elena appeared later, her golden eyes took in the scene with a grim, unsurprised clarity. She did not flinch from the heir, nor did she weep for Margaret. She simply looked at Marta. "The priest has gone to my brother with the physician's journal. The word heresy is on his lips. It will be the pyre for you, and the sword for the child." Her gaze was unwavering, The time for whispers is over. You need to see the source of our affliction. You need to see Thomas. The North Tower was a place of silence and forgotten things. The air grew colder as they climbed, Elena leading the way with a torch. The air followed them, a silent, hulking shadow. He seemed to sense the importance of this journey, his usual restlessness replaced by a watchful calm. At the final, heavily barred door, Elena produced a key from her robes. He has not seen another soul, save the guards who slide his food through a slot, in 15 years, she said, her voice echoing in the stone stairwell. Be ready. The door swung open on protesting hinges. The stench that rolled out was feral, of old straw, unwashed flesh, and raw meat. The room was sparse, lit by a single high window, and in the center, chained to the wall by a thick iron collar, was Thomas Blackthorn. He was a wild vision of what his brother Raymond feared to become. Long, matted hair and a beard cascaded down his chest. His clothes were mere rags, but it was his eyes that held Marta, a blazing, fully manifested yellow, shining with a fierce, untamed intelligence. He was not the slavering beast of legend. He was a prophet in a cage. As the air ducked through the doorway, Thomas's head snapped up. He did not snarl or cower. He went perfectly still, his glowing eyes fixed on the young heir. Then he slowly, deliberately, bowed his head, a gesture of submission, of recognition. He began to speak, his voice a dry, rasping river of sounds that were guttural, complex, and utterly alien. It was a language of power and dust, of desert winds and stone tablets. Elena translated softly, her own voice filled with a weary reverence. He says, "The blood of the Sky Father runs true in this one. The first unbroken vessel. The sleeper has awakened." Thomas's gaze then shifted to Marta. He pointed a grimy, claw-tipped finger at her, the midwife of the new dawn. Elena translated, "She who stands at the threshold." Thomas spoke again, his cadence becoming more urgent, his eyes burning into Marta's. "The old lord fights the tide in his own veins. He will break upon the rocks of his own fear. The child is the future, but the future must be claimed. It will not be given." He gestured around his cell. This is the fate of the unclaimed, the half-formed, the lost." A profound sadness filled his glowing eyes. "Do not let the heir become like me, a secret to be locked away. He must reign, or he will go mad with the power of it." The truth of it slammed into Marta. Thomas wasn't mad. He was fully Annunaki in mind, trapped in a body that had only partially transformed. He was a conscious, intelligent being who had been driven to feral desperation by a lifetime of solitary confinement for a crime he did not choose. He was a warning. The heir took a step toward his uncle, his head cocked. He seemed to be listening, understanding on a level deeper than language. He rumbled a soft, acknowledging sound. Thomas responded with a single, clear word, spoken not in English, but in the same ancient tongue. Elena did not need to translate. The meaning was clear. "King." Thomas was not just acknowledging his nephew. He was swearing fealty. Marta looked from the feral, intelligent brother to the powerful, evolving heir, and finally to Elena, the poised and pragmatic sister who had accepted her own strange nature. The puzzle pieces of House Blackthorn clicked into a terrifying, magnificent picture. This was not a family collapsing under a curse. It was a dynasty shedding its skin, struggling to be born into a new, more powerful form. The enemy was not a demon. The enemy was fear, Raymond's fear, the church's fear, the world's fear. And as Marta stood in that tower room, surrounded by the living proof of the Blackthorn legacy, she knew with chilling certainty that this new world, this evolution, would not be locked away again. It would fight for its throne, and it would win. The truth, once a quiet seed in the dungeon's dark, had erupted into a venomous vine, strangling Blackthorn Keep. Father Cornelius, armed with Dr. Graves' journal, had poured his poison into Lord Raymond's ear. The words heresy and abomination had replaced curse and demon, and they demanded a more final solution. Marta felt the shift before she saw it. The heir, standing guard at her cell, grew restless, his massive head lifted. nostrils flaring as he sampled the air drifting down from the upper levels. He let out a low, warning growl, a sound that spoke of smoke and steel and gathering men. "They are coming for him," Elena stated, appearing at the dungeon entrance, her face a mask of grim resolve. "My brother has given the order. The priest has convinced him that purging the taint is the only way to save his soul and his house. Captain Stormborn is mustering the guards." The heir understood the tone, if not every word. He turned to Marta, his crimson eyes burning with a fierce light. "Mine," he rumbled, the word a territorial declaration that shook the stones. This was no longer about protection. This was about dominion. The clash, when it came, was not a battle. It was an earthquake. It began with the tramp of armored boots and the glint of spear points in the torchlight. Captain Stormborn stood at the front, his face a conflicted granite mask, his iron hook gleaming. Behind him were a dozen guards, their fear palpable. "The Lord commands you to stand down, creature," the captain's voice echoed, firm but lacking conviction. "Surrender the woman and submit to holy confinement." The air answered with a roar that was a physical force, a wave of sound that made the men flinch and dust rain from the ceiling. He did not wait for them to advance. He charged. Marta had seen his strength before, but never unleashed with such focused, brutal intent. He was a whirlwind of obsidian claws and crushing force. A spear shattered against his chest. A guard was lifted and thrown like a child's toy, his armor clattering against the wall. Captain Stormborn met him head-on, his sword flashing. The air caught the blade on his forearm, the steel screeching against a hide that was now as tough as boiled leather. With a twist of his wrist, he snapped the sword and backhanded the captain, sending the massive man sprawling, dazed but alive. A mercy that was not extended to the others. It was a slaughter, swift and terrifying. The heir was not just fighting. He was clearing his territory. Amidst the chaos, a different figure appeared at the end of the corridor. Lord Raymond. He had not come in full armor, but in his black velvet, a silver-tipped longsword in his hand, the same type of sword he had used on Cedric. His face was a tragic canvas of grief, rage, and a dawning, horrified recognition. "Stop this!" Raymond screamed, his voice cracking. "I am your lord. I am your father." The heir, standing amidst the wreckage of the guards, turned. He looked at Raymond, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something, not memory, but a deeper, genetic recognition. Then he saw the silver-tipped sword, the weapon that had killed his brother. A fresh, primal snarl ripped from his throat. Raymond charged, a desperate, suicidal act. He was a skilled swordsman, but he was fighting a force of nature. The air moved with blinding speed, batting the sword aside and seizing Raymond by the throat. He lifted his father effortlessly, the Lord's feet kicking inches from the ground. This was the moment, the old world choking in the grip of the new. Marta found her voice. "No," she cried out, stumbling from the cell. "He is your blood, your past. Do not become his murderer." The heir's grip tightened. Raymond's face began to purple, his eyes bulging with terror as he stared into the feral, crimson eyes of his son. And then, something in Raymond broke. Not his body, but his will. The fight drained from him. A single, tear track cut through the grime on his cheek. His hands, which had been clawing at the immense arm holding him, fell limp. The heir hesitated. The snarl died in his throat. He looked from his father's surrendering form to Marta's pleading face. He gave a sharp, frustrated growl, and then, with a contemptuous flick of his wrist, he threw Lord Raymond aside. The Lord crashed into a wall and slid to the floor, unconscious, but alive. The message was as clear as it was devastating. He had the power to kill, but he had chosen not to. He had shown mercy, not out of love, but out of a new, calculating form of dominance. Sparing the old lord was the ultimate proof of his supremacy. The heir stood over his father's prone body, threw back his head, and let out a long, piercing howl that was neither human nor holy wolf. It was a coronation cry. It was the sound of a new age announcing itself in fire and blood, and it echoed through the heart of Blackthorn Keep, a promise and a warning that could no longer be ignored. The howl did not fade. It seeped into the stones of Blackthorn Keep, a vibration that shifted the very foundations of reality. In its wake, a profound silence fell, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the ragged breaths of the survivors. The heir stood panting over his father's unconscious form, a conqueror surveying his first bloody kingdom. Marta stared at the scene, the ancestors' words echoing in her mind. The shell must crack for the fledgling to fly. The shell was not just a dungeon or the old beliefs. It was Lord Raymond's authority. It was now shattered. The heir turned his crimson gaze to her. The feral rage was gone, replaced by that unnerving, ancient intelligence. He gestured with his head, a clear command to follow, and began to walk, not back into the depths, but up, out of the dungeons. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. Her legs trembling, Marta followed. They moved through a keep transformed. Guards who saw them coming dropped their weapons and pressed themselves against the walls, their faces ashen with terror. Servants fled or froze like startled deer. The heir ignored them all, his destination clear. He led her to the great hall, the heart of Blackthorn power. He strode to the high table, where the lord's ornate, oaken chair stood. He did not sit. He wrapped his claws around its arms, and with the sickening crack of splintering wood, he tore the centuries-old symbol of authority to pieces, tossing the fragments into the cold fireplace. Then, he turned and climbed onto the heavy stone table itself. He stood there, a 7-foot-tall fusion of man, wolf, and god, and surveyed the hall. This was his throne. One by one, the survivors were herded into the hall by a few cowed guards acting under the heir's silent command. Lord Raymond was half carried, half dragged in by Captain Stormborn. The captain's one good eye fixed on the creature with the new, grim acceptance. Dr. Graves stood near the back, his journal clutched in his hands, his expression one of terrified awe. Elena entered calmly, her golden eyes meeting her nephew's without fear, a silent ally acknowledging the new order. Greta the cook watched from a servant's entrance, her face unreadable. The heir's gaze swept over them all. He pointed a single, terrible claw at his father. "Old," he rumbled, the word of judgment. Then, he pointed to his own chest. "New." He then turned and pointed directly at Marta. "Witness." The titles were bestowed. The roles were assigned. There would be no more discussion, no more trials, no more pleas. The transition of power was complete. It was brutal, it was terrifying, and it was absolute. In the days that followed, a new, strange rhythm settled over the keep. The heir did not rule with decrees or councils. He ruled by presence. His will was communicated through gestures, guttural commands, and an instinctual understanding of the castle's workings. Those who obeyed were left in peace. Those who did not vanished. Lord Raymond was confined to his chambers, a ghost of his former self, a living monument to the world that was. Captain Stormborn, his pragmatism overriding his fear, became the enforcer of the new, unspoken laws. Dr. Graves was commanded to continue his studies, no longer in secret, but in service to understanding the new Lord's nature. And Marta, her role was the most complex. She was his touchstone to the world he had usurped, his interpreter, his living memory. He would bring her texts from the library, point to maps of the surrounding lands, and listen as she spoke of history, of alliances, of the world beyond the stone walls. He was learning, adapting at a frightening pace, building the knowledge to match his power. She stood one evening at a high window, looking out at the darkening forest. The heir came to stand beside her, silent as a mountain. He was no longer the crying infant or the rampaging beast. He was becoming a sovereign. "The other houses will come," Marta said softly, not looking at him. "Vance will have spread his tales. They will see a monster on the Blackthorn seat. They will come with fire and sword." The heir made a sound, a low chuff that might have been a laugh. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, the claws carefully retracted. The touch was no longer possessive, but proprietary. She was his advisor, his strategist, the midwife to his reign. He looked out at the gathering night, his crimson eyes glowing like beacons. "Let them come," he growled. Marta looked up at his profile. a silhouette of power against the twilight. The fear was still there, a cold stone in her gut, but it was joined by something else, something she had never imagined feeling. A dreadful, unwavering certainty. The story of House Blackthorn was not ending. It was beginning a new, terrifying, and magnificent chapter. And she, the old midwife with the broken hands, would have a front row seat to it all. She had delivered the heir. Now, she would witness the dawn of his empire. Thank you for watching. First of all, the stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comment section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the card section at the top right. See you in the next video.